For those of you who have been curious about cycles, this section we create a special pose for the character in order to illustrate the cycles renderer, and I show how to convert the Blender material that we've been using into nodes for the cycles renderer. For example, here's our character's node tree for his material, and we also do some simple nodes for the building he's standing on. Well, we've used the Blender renderer for most of this course, with the exception of the game engine rendering. There's also the Cycles renderer, which is a very good renderer. It's Blender's newer one. I think for the cartoony stuff, I prefer the Blender renderer. But people are going to ask me for Cycles. They're going to ask about it, and so I figure I should show something for it. So why don't we put this guy in a cool pose? Let's detach that, and let's turn on the auto keyframing. We'll create a new action. Let's call it just, let me just say pose, or better yet, it says stance action. And we'll do Alt G, Alt R, and we'll just stick him in a nice stance. It'll be easier in solid mode and faster. Bring his arms down. You know what? Before I start doing something like that, I'm gonna make sure we're on local. Can I have my widget on? Local widget on, okay. Let's move his feet out. Let's give him a little bend here. Ah! We'll do the looking out over the city pose. Why don't we create a new camera? Shift A, camera, and then cameras, set active object as camera. Well, let's go back to here. Let's look at it in perspective. Oh, that's not bad. Control Alt 0. Go ZZ. Let's see how high this is. Okay. Maybe this leg. I'm going to hide our other camera. look through the current camera so we can see what we're doing. Don't want to really stretch his leg out. We'll roll his foot like this, and we'll bring it down. Let's look at it from the front. Let's see. He should be twisting maybe a little bit this way. We can give his hand, open it up this hand a little bit. This one he's ready to punch someone with. Punch evil. He's ready to punch evil. Let's see. That's kind of neat. And how about if we set up something for him to be standing on? Let's do Shift A, cube. Go here. Actually, that's nice. We can just say GZ -1. Enter. He's on one little cube. Let's get our array modifier again, the ever useful array modifier, and maybe give a little bit of a gap. Too much. About 1.05. How about 1.025? Yeah, that looks all right. And then how about we add another array modifier, and on this one we'll do a couple more, but I would like it to be, instead of on the X, this one to be on the Y. And then, for the sake of the pose, well, if we're going to do cycles, I should wait for the materials until we're done with the posing. Let's try our current rendering setup. View all, 1-to-1. Alright, that's our current setup. Why don't we go over here and say, hey, let's do this. I can keep 256, but let's go. Let's go to the height 512. No, maybe bring the width up a little bit. We don't have to keep it a friendly base 2 number for this one. Maybe for this guy, where we turned sky off under shading, we'll turn it back on, go into the world, give him a dark, oh, probably too much light in this scene. Well, you know what? We're going to switch over to cycles. So let's say that this is the pose, and we'll get into the details of cycles next. Save as. So let's drag over here so we can see our drop-down box again. And we'll switch over to the cycles renderer. And then what we need to do is select our mesh that has our materials on it. And we're going to have to set up to use nodes. So let's go over to our node editor. Click on materials, mouse wheel in, and we'll do Shift A, and for texture we'll say there's going to be an image texture, it's the costume. Drag that in. Let's view rendered. So now we've got the costume on him, and we'll need to, so this is what you're doing with cycles. It looks complicated, but it's really not when you do it. Well, when you open up someone's who has a huge one, but that it can be complicated to figure out. But when you're building it, it's really fairly straightforward. So let's add another image texture. And we'll do something, say, with the emit. We'll add an emission shader. We'll drag that in, and then we need a mix shader. For our material output. Take this guy in. This guy, we'll drag him over here. Now you can see that's emitting, which is fun. Right. We should probably scoot this way over. You'll work your computer hard when you're doing cycles too. Let's do something with his normal map. Let's do, how about vector normal map? And should add a texture. Our normal, and we'll switch it here to non-color data, and we'll set that in here. We'll set our UV map, drag that in for our vector. That's not good, not our vector, our normal. Control left click and drag. Now it's hard for me to see what's going on, so what I need to do for the scene is get rid of these lights, and I'm just going to create an object that a plane that emits light. New, let's see, emission, let's try maybe a strength of 2. Click on him again. Switch back to having it rendering. We could select this object, make it a little bigger. Let's double the amount it's emitting. We should really switch this from being a diffuse shader to like a toon shader, since that's what we're using on the other one. I'm not seeing much of his muscles as I'm expecting. Let me switch that to color. Yeah, that's working better. Now we're seeing his muscles. Let's see, we still need his specular map. Texture, image texture. It's going to be his specular. And for his specular, I guess we could just use a glossy shader. Need another mix shader, so I'll just click on this guy and Shift D. Drag that in. How if we do that? And bring this one down here. There we go. You should probably mix it a little bit less. You know, if you had like, you know, all the way to 1, you'd see his boots are really shiny because that's where we're letting that specularity be through before. Remember on the map? So we'll just cut this way back. And the size of the toon, I think we should probably make this a little more bigger. And the emission, we're mixing it, so I mean we could actually, since we're mixing it half and half, kind of double it so we get a really strong light emitting. And you know, we can play with some of the settings here for like the sampling. For example, the preview, if we set it to 0, it'll just keep improving all the time. I like this light. Up a little higher. There we go. We see a little more of his muscles. And this is supposed to be a dark night, so I'm just going to make this world a little darker. And back to what I was doing here. Setting this to 0, it'll just keep working all the time. Sampling, you could see, if we open this up a little more, you know, at some point you can hit escape and stop it, but when you finally do your render, you may want to decide, oh, it looks good around 100, and that's what you'll do your rendering at. And then for the light paths, you know, you've got a variety of options, and honestly, I'm still learning this, but like this one, this results in a darker image but with more noise, but with less noise. Well, currently the scene that we're doing is a nice dark one, and we don't want a lot of noise in it. And let's see. You know, there's some settings here too for you know, the progressive render here. You know, it's going to progressively render it So it says this is slower, but it can be saved. You know, I'm going to switch. This is static. We're not altering the mesh. That'll speed things up, switching to static. We can keep persistent images. We can save the buffers to a progressive refine. And that'll help some of our performance. And we can give a material for our block. You know, maybe we want to, let's see, how about some noise? And we'll just set that for the displacement. Let's preview that so we can see what we're dealing with. Maybe we'll bump the scale up. So that looks. Maybe bump up the detail. So it looks more like he's standing on some sort of cement. So cycles is not really that bad once you start thinking about how things flow through, and you know, it does help trying to organize things. So for example here, I'm really kind of a nut when it comes to constantly moving my nodes around. And you can collapse the nodes too once you are comfortable with the settings, just to make them smaller, but you know, that helps seeing the flow if you've got things lined up reasonably. You know, using space can help too. It's similar to programming when you're keeping things apart, like these two things go really strongly together. These are just mix shaders, so not a big deal. I know it's probably hard to see on the screen right now, but I'll zoom in here. I'll do shift space. Here we go. So for example, those guys go together. You know, these two go together. These two go together. And these two go together. So then when you come back to it in 6 months and you're like wondering, what the heck was I doing? You'll be able to visually get a better sense of how you put it together. And you know, the mixing is straightforward, so it's just mix, bring those together into the final material output. There we go. Nice dramatic night scene.